Fats are important because they are the primary building blocks of the membranes in all of your cells. But just what are fats? Well, quite simply, they're storage units composed of individual fatty acids. Now, a fat typically has more than one fatty acid and is distinguished by the specific combination of fatty acids making it up. Most fat molecules are composed of a glycerol head and 3 fatty acid tails. Each tail is a long hydrocarbon chain, which is simply a carbon skeleton bound to hydrogen atoms. When all the carbons are fully bound to hydrogens, the fatty acid is said to be saturated, as all the bonds between the carbon atoms are single and the carbon chain has a straight shape. A fat molecule made entirely of saturated fatty acids is called a saturated fat. Due to their straight tails, saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature. On the other hand, when the carbon chain has fewer hydrogen atoms, it is said to be unsaturated. Instead of binding to a maximum number of hydrogen atoms, some carbon atoms bind to each other with a double bond. Now, the presence of double bonds may actually bend the carbon chain, which creates gaps between the molecules, making them less compact. As a result, unsaturated fats are usually liquid at room temperature. A fat molecule that contains only one double bond is called a mono unsaturated fat, mono of course being one, while one that has multiple double bonds is called polyunsaturated fats, and poly of course means many. When you eat too many seed oils, which have omega-6 fats in LA, it's going to radically increase your risk of becoming fat and obese. But it doesn't do this by directly depositing this fat into your body and your tissues. It does it through an indirect route. It does it by increasing oxidative stress in your body. Let's define what oxidative stress is in simpler terms. It simply occurs when there are too many free radicals in your body. But what is a free radical? Well, these are unstable molecules that can damage your cells and cell membranes and DNA and stem cells and mitochondria, and they can contribute to a wide variety of health problems. But they're primarily unstable oxygen molecules, although there can be some nitrogen molecules also. Now, they're unstable because they have an uneven or an unpaired amount of electrons. When you have too many free radicals, you actually rapidly accelerate aging and create a wide variety of diseases. When these seed oils are damaged by oxidative stress, they form really harmful byproducts that contributes to inflammation and chronic degenerative disease. So remember, nature loves balance. So when you lose an electron and that molecule becomes unpaired and unstable, it seeks to rebalance itself and it gains an electron and steal it from other molecules. Now, this can create a very serious domino effect that cascades into a self-perpetuating cycle of more and more free radicals. Now, even though most people believe that all free radicals are dangerous, this is not quite true, because it's important to understand that some free radicals are actually beneficial as you create them in your mitochondria in the process of creating cellular energy. So the issue is excess free radicals, which result from excess omega-6 fat in the form of seed oils. So now that you have a better idea of what a free radical is, let's help you better understand what damage they do in your body. And you can do this by imagining a fragile glass vase that has many small cracks. Just like how the cracks in the vase can make it more likely to break, the double bonds in the seed oil fats make them more susceptible to damage from free radicals. So what are some of the common exposures that can create these free radicals that can damage the seed oil fats? Well, there's a wide variety of them, but I'm going to list a few of the most common ones, such as tobacco smoke, air pollution, especially indoors, pesticides and herbicides, ultraviolet radiation from sunlight. We have ionizing radiation from X-rays and especially from CT scans, non-ionizing radiation from cell phones and Wi-Fi, and heavy metals such as lead, cadmium, and mercury, excessive alcohol, and industrial chemicals. Now, it's also important to clarify that omega-6 fats are not inherently dangerous. And in fact, it's almost impossible to eat food and not get some of them in your diet. But normally it's supposed to be in the range of 1 to 2%. They only become dangerous when they're in excess amounts because they can be damaged by the pervasive oxidative stressors in your environment that I just identified. Now, the omega-6 fats are probably the single largest contributor to excess oxidative stress in your body because they have so many unstable double bonds, which are just highly susceptible to damage. We collectively refers to polyunsaturated fats as PUFAs, which is short for polyunsaturated fatty acids. So PUFAs remain liquid in the refrigerator because of the double bonds that they have. The more double bonds they have, the more likely they will be a liquid in the fridge. Now, the double bonds are the key, the absolute key to understanding why PUFAs are so highly perishable and susceptible to oxidative damage. These double bonds are very vulnerable to damage by oxygen, heat, and pressure. But the question you might have is, if PUFAs are so toxic to life, why were they created in nature? Well, plants and animals that live in cold environments have to mobilize their biology to survive the cold, and creating unsaturated fats like PUFAs is how they accomplish this. This is because saturated fats harden at relatively moderate temperatures. For example, if you put the butter in the refrigerator, it's going to become hard. An animal or a plant living at high latitudes like most of North America, which has cold temperatures, especially in the winter, they simply can't survive if they have saturated fats as their primary source of energy storage. So in direct proportion to the coldness of the climate that plants and animals live, they remove hydrogens from the fats and convert them to PUFAs, which makes them liquid at colder temperatures. However, the more unsaturated fat or less hydrogen it has, the downside is it makes them highly susceptible to oxidative damage. Conversely, when you place seed oils at room temperature, or your body temperature, which is even higher typically of 98 degrees Fahrenheit, they quickly start to harden into solid masses because of this oxidative damage. Now, if an organism or plant is going to live outside of a cold environment, they simply have to minimize the amount of PUFAs they have. The warmer the environment is, the more saturated their fat has to be to survive, because the highly unsaturated PUFAs simply turn to a glue, plastic-like material that is totally incompatible with life. Additionally, the PUFAs in plants have other problems. This is because they create seeds, and it's not just PUFAs in the seeds. There are other items in there which are potentially damaging and dangerous to biology. The plants need to create a storage form of nutrition in their seeds to support their offspring's survival and development. And one of the ways plants do this is to use self-generated pesticides to ward off predators, and they're incorporated into the seed as a self-defense mechanism. The problem is that these pesticides generated by the plant actually block digestion in any animal predator that eats them. And they do this because the seed is the most important part of the plant. The plant can grow new leaves if a predator eats them, but the seed is essential to their long-term survival of the plant, and it needs to protect them at all costs. And in fact, the worst toxin as far as animals are concerned are typically in the seeds of plants. This is just another reason, independent of the PUFAs, why you want to have serious second thoughts about eating large amounts of seeds or nuts, because of these self-defense mechanisms that the plants have for predators. So now that we have reviewed the fat basics and you now understand what PUFAs are, we're going to discuss the primary pernicious toxin in your diet, which is omega-6 fat, specifically linoleic acid, because this fat makes up the majority of many people's total daily calories. Linoleic acid actually makes up the bulk, about 60 to 80% of omega-6 fats, and is the primary contributor to disease. PUFAs are only a toxin, however, when they are consumed in excess quantities. But the problem is, nearly everyone is consuming exponentially more than what is ideal. Prior to the 20th century, somewhere around in the 1860s, a mere 150 years ago, the average intake of linoleic acid was under 2% of total daily calorie intake, which is close to the biological optimal range, which is around 1 to 2%. This is historically what all our ancestors ate prior to the 20th century. Today, however, LA consumption is over 25% of total calorie intake for the average person. So when linoleic acid is consumed at these levels, it is all but guaranteed to cause tissue metabolic damage that radically increases your risk for virtually every chronic disease known to man. It will also radically accelerate your biological clock, resulting in premature aging and death. The single greatest change to the human diet in all of history was the introduction of industrially processed seed oils after the Civil War in the United States. Before that time, the Western world, for the most part, only consumed animal fats like beef tallow and ghee, which would be examples. Eastern societies used cold-pressed fats like coconut and palm oil. Vegetable oils or seed oils like we know them today, they simply never existed until the mid-1800s. Consumption of these toxic fats increased over the next century to the point that nearly 90% of added dietary fats came from seed oils. Omega-6 fat consumption as a percentage of the typical diet at that time accounted for nearly 1/100th of total calorie intake in 1865 and increased to more than 1/4 of total calories by 2010. That, my friends, is a 25-fold increase, and in my view, the primary explanation for the radical increase we're seeing in virtually all chronic degenerative diseases. Seed oils are exponentially more pernicious to your health than sugar because they last far longer in your body. The half-life of LA is around 680 days, or approximately 2 years. This means that it will take you about 6 years to replace 95% of the LA in your body with healthy fats. This, my friends, is the primary reason why it's so important to keep your LA intake as low as possible. Because the oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction from excess LA are responsible for just about every chronic disease known to man, including cancer, dementia, diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. In the United States, nearly 43% of adults 20 years and over are obese. Well, in total, nearly 74%, or 3 out of 4 people, are overweight or obese. Well, these statistics are already alarming. The American Obesity Association suggests that by 2025, a mere 2 years from now, 50% of Americans will be obese. And they predict that by the end of the decade, 2030, 60% of us will be obese, not just overweight, but obese. It is also interesting that the U.S. has the highest obesity rate in the developed world and consumes more seed oils per person than any other nation. As you can see from the graph, the obesity epidemic is not new. It's been around for quite a while. It actually began in the early 20th century as seed oils entered the food supply and gradually displaced natural animal fats. In the 19th century, heart disease was virtually unknown. In fact, during the 19th century, there were only 9 papers reported in the literature documenting heart disease. The first heart attack was reported in 1912 in the U.S. Heart disease continued to be a rare event until the 1920s, when the integration of seed oils into diet began to progressively increase. And then it ramped up significantly when a campaign against saturated fats started with Ansel Keys when he published his diet heart hypothesis in 1953. He looked at 6 countries and found a positive correlation between fat consumption and heart disease. The problem is that he left out other countries because the inclusion of those countries simply did not support his hypothesis. In 1961, Keyes wrote the first official recommendations to vilify and reduce the intake of saturated fat and cholesterol and to replace it with PUFAs, such as seed oils and linoleic acid. The advice was then used in the 1977 U.S. dietary guidelines. These cheap, industrially processed seed oils were marketed as health foods, if not drugs, and as expected, their consumption dramatically increased. Public health authorities disparaged animal fats, resulting in a nearly uniform negative public perception of saturated fats. For the last 75 years, Americans have been targeted with discrediting propaganda against saturated animal fats. Even though conventional medicine has advised you to substitute seed oils to replace saturated fats from animals to prevent heart disease, human trials have conclusively demonstrated that seed oils do not decrease atherosclerosis, or more importantly, decrease your risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. There is a widespread medical myth that atherosclerotic plaque is caused by too much LDL, low-density lipoproteins, and cholesterol in your blood. Yet, this is not what the research shows. Instead, science tells us that the mechanism driving atherosclerosis is the oxidation of PUFAs, specifically LA, in your LDL membrane. This is because excess PUFAs lead to fragile cell membranes that can easily be damaged by oxidation and free radicals. Atherosclerosis is not caused by the amount of cholesterol carried by your LDL, but by oxidative damage to the LA that the LDL contains, which is also called oxidized LDL. It has been shown that oxidized LDL is a far, far better predictor of heart disease than simple LDL. A surefire way to induce cancer in many animal models is to feed them seed oils. Imagine that. Animals typically develop cancer once the LA in their diet reaches 4 to 10% of their total caloric intake. Disturbingly, most Americans get approximately 25% or 2 to 4 times as much of their total daily calories from seed oils. We're far over the threshold for safe levels of these fats based on the laboratory work in animals. Remember, our ancestors typically consumed less than 2% of their calories as omega-6, linoleic acid. There's even evidence showing eliminating seed oils from your diet will dramatically reduce your risk of sunburn, and you can also dramatically lower your risk of the most common cancer, skin cancer. This is because susceptibility to the ultraviolet radiation damage is controlled by how much LA is in your diet. So hopefully you're beginning to understand just how dangerous these PUFAs are. So how do we avoid them in our diet? The key question. Well, first of all, let's talk about eating in a restaurant. It is the rare, and I'm telling you, the rare restaurant that provides low LA food that they're serving. This is because it is far cheaper to use seed oils than to use beef tallow or butter to cook with. They also use seed oils in most of their sauces and salad dressings, and certainly any pastries they're creating. Finally, it goes without saying that virtually any fried food should be avoided, as they are invariably the worst of all foods, having heated seed oils full of toxic seed oil metabolites. Now, it is possible to eat healthily in some restaurants, but it would be the rare exception. If they are using butter or tallow to cook with, the food they are preparing will be low in seed oils. Although not as healthy, it is possible to even fry foods in beef tallow. As McDonald's used to do, was cook their French fries in beef tallow until the Center for Science and the Public Interest, or CSPI, did a smear campaign on beef tallow in McDonald's French fries in July of 1990. So your safest and typically least expensive strategy is to seek to consume the majority of your meals at home, or prepare them at home and bring them with you when you travel or go to work. What are the types of foods you should be eliminating, ones that you should be focusing on? Now, you'll see I've compiled a table that provides a comprehensive list of the most commonly consumed oils and their approximate LA content. In general, the lowest LA containing fats would be the fats of choice. Instead of avoiding all oils, a healthier choice would be to use the cooking fats of our ancestors: butter, ghee, and beef tallow. These excellent cooking fats not only would be the lowest in LA, but also provide the important fat-soluble vitamins A or retinol, D, and K2, not K1, but K2. And notice these are animal fats. Vegetable fats, and even saturated vegetable fats like coconut oil, do not contain these important micronutrients. These are only available in animal fats. The majority of Americans simply fail to get enough vitamin A or retinol in their diet. And this can contribute to many chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease and cancers. It also will adversely impact health, survival, and vision. Now, a common myth out there is that seeds and nuts are healthy. I alluded to this earlier with the defense mechanisms that plants have. But most people are convinced, especially in the plant-based community, that nuts and seeds are heart healthy and really some of the most important nutrient-dense foods you can consume. But as you can see in the table below, the LA content of most nuts and seeds is exceedingly high. For example, pecans are 50% LA. This rivals the LA in most seed oils. The only exception is macadamia nuts. So for most people, if you're going to actually quantify the amount of LA or omega-6 fats, it's going to be about 5 grams. If you weigh a lot more, it's going to be maybe closer to 10. So somewhere between 5 and 10 grams a day. You certainly don't want to get the typical 80 grams that the average person is eating. So even though these seeds, most all seeds and nuts are high in LA, that doesn't mean that you should never have them. Remember, the key here is to limit the total amount of LA you're consuming. It should be about 1 to 2% of your total daily calorie intake. Does not have to be 0. That's not the goal. The goal is just to lower it below this threshold. So if you're going to have seeds or nuts, it's okay to have them, but you really have to dramatically limit them. There's just not a handful, but several or a few, because they're going to add up. And macadamia nuts are interesting because they only have 2% of their fat as LA, which means you can have 10 to 30 a day without significantly increasing your LA level. Now, another myth that we need to address in helping you understand how to optimize your intake of LA is that of olive and avocado oils, because they're not the health foods that they're widely promoted to be. And almost everyone that I lecture to on this topic has questions about olive and avocado oils. So olive oil has increased more than tenfold in the United States over the past 35 years. In his book, Real Food, Fake Food, Larry Olmsted, who was an investigative journalist and a food critic, revealed the dark side of this otherwise healthy food. Olives and olive oils are well known for the many health benefits, especially for the heart, but using adulterated olive oil will hardly do your health any favors. In general, people believe the U.S. FDA is policing and regulating food fraud, but nothing could be further from the truth. The FDA's primary focus is to make sure the ingredient label is accurate in tracking food-related disease outbreaks. The FDA does little to nothing in terms of preventing illegally adulterated foods from being sold. Why is this important? Because the vast majority of olive oil and avocado oil is adulterated. And the tests reveal that anywhere from 60 to 90% of them sold in the U.S. Our grocery stores and restaurants are adulterated with cheap, oxidized seed oils, such as sunflower oil or peanut oil, or even worse, non-human grade olive oils, which are harmful to health in a number of ways. Now, this is even true for extra virgin olive oil. Cheap seed oils are added and will not be listed on the label, nor will most people be able to discern that their olive oil is not 100% pure. The chances are you've been eating poor quality olive oil for a long time, or you've never tasted a pure high quality olive oil to begin with, so you don't even realize there's anything wrong with it. And remember, avocado oil is just as bad as olive oil. Now, many believe that avocado oil is as healthy as olive oil, but this is simply not the case. 2020 studies showed that 82% of avocado oil is adulterated, mislabeled, or of poor quality. Now, you can basically divide animal meats into two types. Meats coming from animals with one stomach, or monogastric, and those coming from animals that have multiple parts to their stomach, which are also called ruminants. This would be a polygastric animal. And this includes cows, buffalo, sheep, lamb, goats, deer, elk, and most other game animals. Ruminants have low LA in both their meat and milk, no matter what they eat. This is because their stomach has a biohydrogenation chamber that contains bacteria that can convert the high LA fat that they eat into saturated and monounsaturated fats. This is in contrast to animals with one stomach, like chickens and pork, that are fed a diet very high in LA, typically corn and soy, which drives high levels of LA in their tissues, just as we do ourselves, because we don't have the ability to hydrogenate those PUFAs. Interestingly, the difference in LA in ruminants that are 100% grass-fed, as they were designed to be eating, and those that are fed corn and soy, is only about 0.5%. So if you had a grass-fed organic steak, which is the best way to get it, grass-fed and organic, versus a GMO corn-fed steak, it's maybe 2% in the grass-fed and maybe 2.5% in GMO corn-fed. So it's not a big difference. So from an LA perspective, there's not much difference between CAFO beef and grass-fed only beef. However, grass-fed beef is far preferred because it has less glyphosate, hormones, and other toxins. But if you're in a pinch and you're detoxing regularly, you could have non-organic meat of the ruminants, but it is not the preferred approach. So it is preferred to get most of your animal protein from ruminants. It would also be wise to avoid or seriously limit all chicken and pork because of the way they're fed. It is the extreme rarity to find any chicken or pork or hogs that are fed non-commercial foods that are loaded with soy and corn, which causes the problem. In fact, chicken is probably the primary source of LA in the diet of most people in America. This is because nearly all conventionally raised chickens and pigs are fed corn, typically GMO varieties that are farmed with glyphosate. But even if they are fed organic corn, the problem is that they're loaded with LA, and most chickens and pork have over 25% LA in their tissue. Now, this is true for chicken eggs too, but they're acceptable because most of us aren't going to be eating more than 4 eggs a day, and a chicken egg has less than 1 gram of LA. And if you're seeking to implement this approach, it probably will be your highest source of LA in your diet, unless you're raising your own chickens. And then you can lower it down to about 0.25 grams if you're not feeding them commercial chicken feed. Do yourself and your family a favor and embark on a journey of eliminating all seed oils from your diet today to ward off virtually every chronic degenerative disease. Remember, they stick in your tissues for 6 to 7 years, which is why you want to be really diligent. It's going to take a while to get out of them. Once you've done the process and you're 5 years down the road, you can be a little more liberal with your ingestion because you're healthier and you don't have a massive storage of these highly toxic oxidative oils in your tissues. So how do you do that? Avoid all seed oils and even fruit oils like olive oil and avocado oils because they're so frequently adulterated with cheap seed oils. Cook with ghee or butter. Ghee's a bit better because it has a higher smoking point or you can use beef tallow. Avoid all, and I do mean all, processed foods, because not only are they loaded with seed oils, but they have many other additives and adulterations which are not going to move you towards health. They're probably one of the largest sources of LA in your diet are these processed foods and the ultra processed foods. Avoid eating at restaurants. Similar problems. Almost every one of these restaurants are using massive amounts of seed oils to cook with and put in their sauces and their dressings. And it's not uncommon for many restaurants to tell you that they're not using them, but you've got to be hyper vigilant. If you're going to be in a restaurant and if you're not a vegetarian, one of the things you could do is to get a steak or some meat, but you can't have it with any sauces, and make sure they don't put seed oil on it when they cook it. In the meantime, you want to avoid chicken and pork and use substitute meat from ruminants. Like the most common in the United States would be beef and lamb. And these you should focus on and concentrate as your primary meat sources. So no matter what health problems you're struggling with, in my over 4 decades of focusing on natural health strategies to optimize human biology, I am absolutely confident that is one of the most foundational strategic interventions you could deploy to improve your health. It is fundamental, foundational to every treatment strategy that I know for virtually any disease. So this is the foundation. Be sure to watch this video a few times so you understand it, and then you and your family will be able to reap the unbelievable health benefits of avoiding these dangerous seed oils and LA in your diet.